Earlier this month, a storm did damage to the roof of Wilkes-Barre City Hall building. Charles McElwee of the Greater Hazleton Historical Society filled me in on what makes that building so interesting and what ties it to the Hazleton area.
And that's a historic building. It's from the mid 1890s, and it was built by a guy named Ben Davy Jr. Now, he was from Wilkes-Barre. His father came from Cornwall in England, and then Davy grew up in Wilkes-Barre, but he was behind a lot of buildings in the Hazleton area, including St. Paul's United Methodist Church. So that was at one time the second oldest church or actually that was the oldest church in Hazleton, but the oldest building now is First Presbyterian. But St. Paul's was one of the runner-ups, and Davy designed that in 1898, and it was what's called a Richardsonian Romanesque building. It's beautiful. It's right behind the Altamont, and unfortunately, we see it falling into disrepair right now, although various people, groups in Hazleton, including the library, are figuring out what to do as we talk right now. In addition, Davy was behind MMI, so he designed MMI in the late 1800s. So a lot of the architectural legacy we see in Hazleton is a result of Davy's work. Fortunately, we saw in Wilkes-Barre this week that one of his masterpieces is going to need some extensive repairs.
I remember being in City Hall back when I was doing a lot of news when I was first getting out of college as a reporter, and it has this feeling of like, maybe I'm wrong, but like Gotham City to me. It just feels like this City Hall. There's some tight spaces in there, even like their council chambers, I believe. It's an interesting building.
It's a really interesting building because it combines all these different styles. So you have a little bit of Romanesque, especially at the base of that building, and then it meets Victorian. You had the turrets, although they were removed. But you're right. I mean, it's the type of building you would associate with Manhattan, even like Brooklyn, not necessarily Wilkes-Barre. Although the argument could be made, Wilkes-Barre really replicated the architecture of Manhattan during the early 20th century, and that City Hall is an interesting contrast from Hazleton City Hall, which is important to note right now because the original City Hall in Hazleton, that was more Victorian. That was built in 1912, 1913, and once had a far larger tower. But then when the Depression hit, FDR started the WPA, so all these public works projects in every city and town were to keep people employed. So the City Hall that we see today is actually a WPA project that turned it into this Art Deco building. So it did strip Hazleton City Hall of much of its ornamentation, but it kept people employed.
Well, Charles, always interesting stuff when you mentioned trying to save buildings and places in Hazleton like St. Paul's, the efforts you do and the Greater Hazleton Historical Society. It's wonderful. We have some time on our hands right now as we're all staying home and staying safe, so check out the Greater Hazleton Historical Society and Museum on Facebook. They have a bunch of great pictures and a lot of great information.